Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Priska Aisha Antofi. My nickname is Priska. I'm from class 1C Electronic Engineering. My student ID number is 21010422042, and I'm a member of the third group. Today, I wanted to tell you guys about the verbs. First, what is a verb? Verbs are words that describe actions, whether physical or mental. Verbs also describe a stage of being, like the verbs be, become, or exist. Some verbs also act as helper verbs to change the tenses of another verbs. Likewise, these helper verbs can change a positive statement to a negative one with words like not. Every sentence needs at least one verb. If there's no verbs, it's an incomplete sentence or a sentence fragment, except for imperative sentence. A sentence also needs a subject, the things doing the action. Number 2 is types of verbs. First, dynamic or action verbs. Most verbs describe a physical action or activity, something external that can be seen or heard. These verbs are formally known as dynamic verbs, but can also be called action or event verbs. Examples: walk, laugh, swim, play, eat, drink, sing, dance, talk, and say. There's a lot of action that take place in our minds and feelings, which are not external. Verbs that describe mental or internal action are still dynamic verbs, but they are not always so obvious. These include process verbs, which describe action of transition. Example: consider, guess, change, grow, live, endure, success, and fail. Second is stative or stage of being verbs. The opposite of dynamic verbs of action is stative verbs of being. Stative verbs describe a subject, stage, or feeling, including things they like and don't like. Examples: want, need, prefer, love, hate, like, and dislike. One of the most important parts of stative verbs is that you can use them in the continuous tenses. Stative verbs stick to the simple tenses or occasionally use the perfect. The trouble is that some verbs can be dynamic or stative, depending on the specific meaning and how they use. This includes the most popular verb be. Third, auxiliary or helping verbs. Auxiliary verbs or helping verbs are used in English to change another verb's tense, voice, or mode. When auxiliary verbs are used, there are always a main verbs that represent the main action. However, the auxiliary verb must still be conjugated correctly. The main auxiliary verbs are be, have, and do. Example: I have eaten fried rice many times before. Phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are phrases that act as individual verbs, often combining two or more words and changing their meaning. The verb get, for example, becomes many different phrasal verbs when combined with different prepositions. When the bus stops, passengers get out on the sidewalk. The important thing to remember about the phrasal verbs is that they act as a single verb, so you can still use them with other verbs and prepositions. However, when you conjugate a phrasal verb, you only conjugate the part of the phrase that actually a verb like get. Next, verb categories. Number 1, transitive, intransitive, and detransitive. Transitive, intransitive, and detransitive refer to how a verb acts with direct and indirect object. A direct object is the person or thing that the action happens to, while an indirect object is the person or thing that receives the direct object. Verbs that don't use either a direct or indirect object are called intransitive. These verbs are complete action by themselves. Example: go, walk, run, talk, sit, sleep, and work. Verbs that use a direct object but not an indirect object are called transitive. They don't always need a direct object, but they have the option. Example: clean, like, love, dislike, had, want, learn, deserve, and say. Verbs that use both direct and indirect object are called the transitive. They don't always need an indirect object, but they have the option. Example: throw, make, buy, sell, read, give, lend, and bring. Number 2, active or and passive voice. In English, the standard format where the subject performs the action is known as the active voice. However, you can switch around your words to make the direct or indirect object the subject of sentence, known as the passive voice. As explained in our guide to the passive voice, you can make a verb passive by adding a conjugated form of be in front of its past participle. For example, Strickland threw the ball to Williams is active voice, and the ball was thrown to William by Strickland is a passive voice. Next, a linking or copular verbs. A linking verb is any verb, dynamic or stative, that directly connects or link the sentence subject to other word in the sentence. A linking verb, also known as a copula or copular verb in formal linguistics, connect the subject not just to other nouns and adjectives, but also the prepositional phrases and other verb in the infinitive form, although the verb be is the most used linking verb in English. Other linking verbs like seem and become are also common. Next, regular versus irregular. Verbs have different form to show different use, such as an action that happened in the past or an action that happened continuously. Normally, these forms follow the same patterns of conjugation so that you can use them same rules and on all verbs. Verbs that use the normal forms are regular verbs. Unfortunately, some verbs don't want to play by the rules. They have their own unique forms with no pattern, specifically for the simple past tense and past participle forms. These are the notorious irregular verbs, and there are quite a few of them, including the most common verb be. Next, verb forms. 1. Root. The root form is the basic form of the verb with no change. It's also the simple present tense for everything except the third person singular. Next, third person singular present. Used with subject like he, she, the singular they or it. The third person singular in the present tense just adds an s to the end of the root form most of the time, like try, carry. You remove the y and add is, like tries and carries. Next, simple past. The past tense show an action that already happened. In most cases, it's made by adding ed to the end of the root form, or just d if the root form already end in an e. However, be careful of irregular verbs. Their rules for the past don't tend to be consistent. Next is present participle. In the present participle, you can add ing to the end of the root form. Like eat, you can change to eating. Next, past participle. The past participle is used for the perfect tenses. In regular verbs, it's the same thing as the simple past tense, so there's nothing extra to learn. However, irregular verbs often use unique past participles, so you may have to memorize their forms. Next, infinitive and gerunds. An infinitive adds the preposition to in front of a verb's root form. Although technically two words, an infinitive act as a single word, usually a noun but sometimes also an adjective or adverb. Next is 3 expert tips on putting verb into actions. 1. Use verb instead of other words for more powerful writing. 2. Use the active voice whenever you can. 3. Use the specific verb instead of modifying general verbs. Okay, that's all for me. I'm sorry if I make any mistake. Thank you for watching. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.